My parents sold my grandmother's antique piano, the one she left strictly to me, and used the $95,000 to buy my sister a car. When I told my grandmother from her hospice bed, she picked up her phone, made one call, and said, "It is time for them to meet my attorney." Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family member. I pulled my sedan into the driveway of my parents' suburban home just in time to see a delivery truck pulling away. My name is Clara. I am 26, and I work as an antique instrument restorer. I stepped out of my car, and the first thing that hit me was the blinding glare of a hot pink luxury SUV parked right in the middle of the driveway. My 23-year-old sister Haley was draped across the hood holding her phone up on a ring light while her fiancé Bryce filmed her. She was popping a bottle of sparkling cider, laughing loudly for her followers. Bryce, a Caucasian luxury car broker, cheered her on. I pushed past them without speaking, feeling a sudden knot forming in my stomach. I walked into the living room and froze. The space by the bay window was completely empty. The custom 1920s Steinway grand piano my grandmother Eleanor had specifically gifted to me was gone. My mother Sylvia and my father Richard were sitting on the couch casually sipping white wine. "Where is my piano?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My mother rolled her eyes and took another sip of her wine. "We sold that useless piece of wood to an antique dealer for $95,000, she said, her tone dripping with casual disdain. "Haley just landed a major brand deal as a lifestyle influencer, and she needs a safe luxury car to maintain her image. You are just a restorer who works in a dusty apron, Clara. Stop being so selfish and be happy for your sister for once." I stared at them, unable to process the sheer audacity of what they had just done. "That piano was not yours to sell," I said, my hands trembling at my sides. "Grandma Eleanor legally gifted it to me before she moved into the hospice center." My father scoffed, crossing his arms. "It was sitting in our living room, Clara. Therefore, it is our property to do with as we see fit. You do not even pay rent here. You should be on your knees thanking us for putting a roof over your head. We provided everything for you. Besides, Haley actually has a future." This was not the first time they had sacrificed my future to fund my sister's lavish lifestyle. When I was 18, my father emptied my college savings account to pay for Haley's extravagant Sweet 16 party. I spent 4 years working night shifts to pay for my degree while my sister paraded around in designer clothes. I looked out the window at Bryce, who was polishing the hood of the pink vehicle. He caught my eye and smirked, raising 2 fingers in a mock salute. He had brokered the car deal. He had helped my parents fence my inheritance just to get his fiancée a flashy toy. "You had no right," I said, my voice growing dangerously quiet. "That piano was a family heirloom. It meant everything to Grandma, and she trusted me to keep it safe." "Oh, please," my mother sneered. "Eleanor is 82 years old and barely knows what day it is. She is lying in a hospice bed, heavily medicated. She will never even know it is gone unless you go crying to her like a little tattletale. But you are not going to do that, because if you do, we will throw you out tonight." My parents smiled smugly, entirely confident that they had backed me into a corner. They expected me to fold just like I had done my entire life. Instead, I turned around and walked right out the front door. I did not scream or show them any sign of weakness or inner defeat. I simply marched past Haley, who was posing for selfies against the driver's side door, and ignored Bryce when he loudly and mockingly asked if I wanted a free ride. I got into my car, locked the doors, and drove straight to the Sunrise Hospice Center. The drive took 20 minutes, but my mind raced a million miles an hour. When I pushed open the door to room 412, I found my grandmother sitting up in bed. Eleanor might have been battling terminal cancer, but her mind was sharper than a razor blade. She looked at my pale face and immediately muted the television. "What did those vultures do to you?" she asked, her voice raspy but firm. I sat down in the chair beside her bed and told her everything. I told her about the empty living room, the shiny pink car sitting in the driveway, and the $95,000 betrayal that had just shattered my entire world. I told her exactly how my mother laughed so casually at the very idea of her ever finding out the absolute truth about their greed. Grandma Eleanor did not gasp, scream, or cry. Instead, a terrifyingly cold and calculated calm expression slowly settled over her weathered face. She reached up with a remarkably steady hand and deliberately pulled her plastic oxygen cannula away from her nose. She grabbed the cell phone from her bedside table and dialed a number she knew by heart. It rang twice before a deep voice answered on the other end. "Marcus," she said, cutting straight to the point. "Unfreeze the contingency protocol. It is time for my daughter to meet you." Days later, I stood inside an exclusive steakhouse. My parents spared no expense for Madison and Hunter's engagement dinner. The room was draped in white silk and floral arrangements. They celebrated a union built on stolen funds, while my mother, Sylvia, soaked up compliments from her friends. I stood near the oak bar holding sparkling water, waiting for the trap to spring. Hunter strutted through the crowd like he owned the building. He was a Caucasian luxury car broker with a slicked-back haircut and a tailored suit screaming arrogance. He talked down to anyone beneath him, and I was at the bottom of his list. He spotted me alone and could not resist gloating. He leaned against the bar and flashed a bright smile. "You know, Chloe, you should enjoy the party," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Madison is happy tonight. Do not ruin her moment." I took a slow sip of water. "I am enjoying the view, Hunter. It is fascinating to see what my inheritance bought." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Let me give you a lesson in how the real world works." That piano was gathering dust. In the eyes of the law, possession is 9/10 of ownership. Your dad asked me to find a buyer, and I did. I found a private collector willing to pay cash fast. "And you took a cut?" I asked, keeping my tone even. Hunter leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I took a $15,000 commission. Do you think a diamond ring like the one on Madison's finger pays for itself? I brokered the deal and made sure the paperwork was handled smoothly. Your parents got cash for the car and I got my fee. Everyone wins except you." He was incredibly proud of his deception and thought he was untouchable. What Hunter did not know was that my phone was sitting right inside my open purse, actively recording every arrogant word. He also did not know my grandmother was a meticulous planner. That Steinway piano was registered with a unique serial number and a certificate of authenticity locked tightly inside a blind trust under my legal name. It could not be legally sold without my physical presence and verified signature. Hunter had just admitted to brokering stolen property and bypassing title requirements. I offered him an innocent smile. "You are right, Hunter. I guess I just do not understand how the real world works." He patted my shoulder patronizingly. "Glad you are catching on. Now excuse me. My future father-in-law is about to give a speech." Hunter walked toward the center of the room where my father David was tapping a silver spoon against his champagne flute. The chiming sound echoed through the room, bringing conversations to a halt. Guests turned their attention to the head table where Madison sat glowing in a designer gown. David cleared his throat and raised his glass high into the air. "Friends and family, thank you all for joining us tonight. We are here to celebrate my daughter Madison and the remarkable man she chose to marry. Hunter has proven himself to be a brilliant businessman and a wonderful addition to our family. We could not be prouder to welcome him into our lives." The guests murmured in agreement and began raising their glasses. Madison beamed, looking at Hunter with pure adoration. "To Madison and Hunter," my father declared loudly, "may your future be as prosperous and bright as you deserve." Before a single guest could take a sip of champagne, the heavy mahogany doors of the dining room swung open with a loud, forceful thud. The sudden noise startled everyone, causing several people to gasp. Two uniformed police officers stepped into the room with stern and uncompromising expressions. Walking between them was Marcus Sterling, my grandmother's estate attorney, looking absolutely lethal in his dark charcoal suit. He carried a thick leather briefcase, and his eyes scanned the silent room with predatory precision. The entire party froze. My mother Sylvia dropped her hand to her chest, her face instantly paling. My father lowered his glass, his arrogant smile vanishing into a mask of pure confusion. "Excuse me," David said, stepping forward with forced authority. "This is a private event. You cannot just barge in here. What is the meaning of this interruption?" Marcus did not even look at my father. He turned his sharp gaze directly toward the head table, locking eyes with the man of the hour. The taller police officer stepped forward, resting his hand on his utility belt. "We are looking for Hunter. We have a warrant for his arrest regarding felony wire fraud, grand larceny, and the illicit trafficking of stolen trust assets." A collective gasp ripped through the room. Madison let out a horrified shriek, grabbing Hunter's arm. Hunter stood completely paralyzed. All the color drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly shade of gray. The slick, confident auto broker from 5 minutes ago was entirely gone, replaced by a terrified man who suddenly realized he had walked blindly into a trap. Marcus stepped forward, holding up a legal document with a certified court seal. "You brokered the sale of a 1920s custom Steinway piano through illegal channels," Marcus said, his voice projecting clearly across the dead silent room. "You facilitated a transaction involving stolen property belonging to a registered blind trust. You accepted a $15,000 commission from a fraudulent sale. The buyer has already surrendered the item to the authorities and provided your contact information." Hunter opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He looked wildly around the room, searching for a way out, searching for my father to fix it. But David was backing away, his face twisted in sudden panic. I stood quietly by the oak bar, taking a slow, calm sip of my sparkling water. The trap had officially snapped shut. I smiled to myself as the evening finally began. The silence in the dining room was so absolute, you could hear the ice clinking in the glasses of the terrified guests. Hunter stood frozen at the head table. His mouth was slightly open, but the slick charm he had wielded just moments before had completely evaporated. He looked from the police officers to Marcus Sterling, and finally to my father David, who was suddenly sweating profusely under the harsh glow of the crystal chandeliers. The taller police officer stepped forward. He held up a clear plastic evidence bag containing a single sheet of paper. "We have the original bill of sale from the antique dealer," the officer said, his voice echoing in the large room. "The document features a signature claiming to be Chloe. However, we have already run preliminary handwriting diagnostics. It is a direct forgery. You and David bypassed the mandatory background checks required for high-value antique transfers by falsifying the legal owner's consent." A collective murmur rippled through the affluent crowd. Guests began whispering to each other, setting their expensive champagne flutes down on the tables. My father stumbled backward, bumping into a waiter. He raised his hands in a frantic gesture of defense. "There has been a huge mistake," David stammered, his face turning a blotchy shade of crimson. "I am the patriarch of this family. I had every right to authorize the sale of items inside my own home. My daughter gave verbal consent." I stepped away from the bar and walked slowly toward the center of the room. "I did not give verbal consent, David," I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm and devoid of emotion. "I specifically told you the piano belonged to me and you sold it anyway. And then you forged my signature to cover your tracks because the dealer required proof of ownership." That was the moment my mother, Patricia, finally snapped out of her shock. Her face contorted into a mask of pure rage. She slammed her hands down on the dining table, rattling the silverware. She stormed around the table, her designer gown swishing angrily around her ankles. "This is a complete outrage!" Patricia shrieked, pointing a manicured finger directly at Marcus. "You are nothing but a lapdog for a senile, bitter old woman. My mother is 82 years old and clearly losing her mind in that hospice bed. And you, Chloe?" Patricia turned her furious gaze on me. Stepping so close, I could smell the sharp scent of her expensive perfume. "You are a jealous, spiteful little girl. You could never stand the fact that Madison is beautiful, successful, and marrying a man who can actually provide for her. You orchestrated this entire circus just to ruin your sister's special night because you are nothing but a miserable restorer wearing dirty aprons. You want to destroy our family over a dusty piece of wood." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I just looked at her with complete indifference. "I did not forge a signature, Mother," I replied evenly. "I did not commit a felony. The only people destroying this family are the ones who thought the law did not apply to them." Marcus Sterling did not even blink at my mother's insult. He was a man who destroyed corporate empires for a living, and a screaming suburban socialite meant absolutely nothing to him. He reached into his thick leather briefcase and pulled out a crisp white envelope. He extended his arm and handed it directly to Patricia. "What is this?" she demanded, refusing to take it. Marcus dropped the envelope onto the table right in front of her. "That is a formal cease and desist order," Marcus stated, his tone dropping the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. "It strictly prohibits you and your husband from contacting your daughter Chloe or my client Eleanor. Furthermore, I strongly advise you to stop screaming confessions of guilt in front of law enforcement officers. It will not help your case." Patricia crossed her arms, her chest heaving with indignant breaths. "We have done nothing wrong. My daughter needed a car for her career and we provided it. That is what good parents do." Marcus adjusted his tie and offered a chilling smile. "I am so glad you brought up the car, Patricia. That brings me to the second part of our visit tonight." Hunter, who had been trying to slowly edge his way toward the kitchen doors, suddenly froze. The funds used to purchase the Porsche Macan were directly sourced from the fraudulent sale of stolen trust assets, Marcus explained methodically, turning to look directly at Madison, who was trembling in her seat. "Under federal and state law, any property purchased with funds derived from grand larceny and wire fraud is subject to immediate seizure. That vehicle is no longer a luxury car. It is officially classified as physical evidence in an active felony investigation." Madison let out a sound that was half gasp and half sob. "No," she cried out, clutching her head. "You cannot take my car. I have a brand deal. I need that car for my followers. It is customized." The police officer stepped toward Hunter and pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "Hunter, put your hands behind your back. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As the metal cuffs clicked shut around Hunter's wrists, a sudden loud mechanical grinding noise echoed from the street outside. The private dining room featured massive floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the restaurant's exclusive valet parking lot. Madison whipped her head toward the glass. Her eyes widened to the size of saucers, and she let out an ear-piercing shriek of absolute horror. She scrambled out of her chair, knocking over a vase of white roses in her desperation, and pressed her hands frantically against the cold window pane. Outside, bathed in the harsh orange glow of the streetlights, a heavy-duty commercial tow truck was backing up. The mechanical grinding noise was the sound of the steel lift lowering into place. It slid perfectly beneath the front tires of Madison's pristine hot pink Porsche Macan. "No," Madison screamed, banging her fists against the thick glass. "Stop him! Somebody stop him! That is my car!" The tow truck operator, completely unfazed by the hysterical woman banging on the restaurant window, secured the heavy chains around the vehicle's custom wheels. He pressed a lever, and the front end of the bright pink luxury SUV was hoisted brutally into the air. With a blast of thick diesel exhaust, the tow truck shifted into gear and dragged the ultimate symbol of my sister's vanity away into the dark, rainy night. The morning after the disastrous engagement dinner, the city streets were slick with fresh rain. I sat in the passenger seat of Marcus Sterling's sleek black sedan as we navigated toward the industrial district. We were heading to a warehouse owned by the antique dealer who had purchased my stolen Steinway. Marcus sat beside me, reviewing a stack of legal documents with absolute focus. He had spent the early hours of the morning securing a court-ordered retrieval mandate. The dealer, a man named Silas, had a reputation for operating in the gray market of luxury goods. However, he was certainly not foolish enough to challenge a federal subpoena or risk a grand larceny charge. We pulled up to a massive brick building. Silas was already waiting outside, pacing nervously near the rusty loading dock. The moment Marcus stepped out of the vehicle, Silas practically tripped over himself trying to cooperate. He unlocked the heavy metal doors and led us into a cavernous room filled with dusty chandeliers, vintage furniture, and covered statues. Silas babbled apologies the entire time, claiming he had absolutely no idea the piano was tied to a registered blind trust. He insisted my father David had assured him the transaction was completely legal and above board. Marcus did not entertain his excuses. He simply handed Silas the court order and told him to remain completely silent. There in the center of the dimly lit room sat my grandmother's 1920s custom Steinway grand piano. The polished mahogany gleamed under the harsh fluorescent warehouse lights. I walked toward it, feeling a sudden wave of deep emotion. This beautiful instrument held my fondest childhood memories. I ran my fingers lightly over the pristine ivory keys, remembering the lessons my grandmother taught me. Then I knelt down and reached underneath the heavy wooden frame, right below the middle C key. I pressed a specific sequence of 3 small, concealed wooden buttons. A soft, mechanical click echoed from inside the piano body. A hidden velvet-lined compartment slid smoothly out from beneath the keyboard. Silas gasped in shock, having thoroughly inspected the instrument without ever noticing the secret drawer. It was a security mechanism my grandmother Eleanor had custom-built decades ago, and she only ever shared the secret with me. Inside the velvet drawer lay a pristine waterproof leather portfolio. I carefully opened the heavy flap and pulled out a thick stack of aged parchment paper. They were original handwritten compositions by a legendary 19th-century Romantic composer. Marcus examined them closely and noted they were easily worth millions of dollars at any prestigious private auction. But the sheet music was not the most important thing inside that drawer. Beneath the fragile compositions lay a thick manila envelope sealed with dark red wax. I broke the wax seal and pulled out a heavy embossed legal document. It was the original certified property deed to the sprawling suburban mansion where my parents currently lived. Marcus smiled a rare, genuine smile as he reviewed the paperwork in my hands. He explained the brilliant legal trap my grandmother had set. He revealed that Eleanor never actually transferred the deed of the house to my mother Patricia. My parents had been living there for decades, completely assuming the house belonged to them. In reality, the massive estate had been sitting securely inside Eleanor's private trust this entire time. Marcus looked me directly in the eyes and confirmed the ultimate truth. As the designated primary beneficiary of that specific trust, I was now the sole legal owner of the property. My parents were essentially just my tenants. Before I could fully process the magnitude of this revelation, the heavy metal doors of the warehouse slammed open. The loud noise echoed through the cavernous space. I turned around to see my mother Patricia and my father David storming into the building. Their clothes were wrinkled and their faces were twisted into masks of pure, desperate panic. Following the humiliating arrest of their future son-in-law and the repossession of the pink Porsche, they were entirely out of options. They had come to the warehouse to demand their $95,000 back from the antique dealer, hoping to use the cash to hire a criminal defense lawyer. David marched aggressively toward Silas, pointing a shaking finger at the dealer's chest. He demanded the money immediately, claiming the deal was void. Patricia stood right behind him, nodding frantically. They were so blinded by their own desperation that they did not even notice Marcus and me standing in the shadows behind the towering antique statues. Silas backed away from my furious father, raising his hands in surrender and silently pointing toward the center of the room. My parents slowly turned their heads, following the dealer's pointing finger. They froze completely in their tracks when they saw me standing next to the recovered Steinway piano. The color drained entirely from my mother's face as she realized the secret compartment was wide open. I stepped out from the shadows, holding the stack of million-dollar compositions in one hand and the embossed property deed in the other. I looked directly at the people who had treated me like a burden my entire life. They had come here seeking salvation through stolen money. Instead, they found themselves standing face to face with the new legal owner of the very house they slept in every night. I took a deliberate step forward, ensuring they saw exactly what I held. "This is what you wanted, is it not?" I asked, my voice echoing loudly across the dusty warehouse floor. I watched as my father's eyes locked onto the heavy legal document in my hand, and I saw the exact moment his arrogant reality shattered into a million tiny, unfixable pieces. He finally understood he had absolutely nothing left. He had traded his daughter's future for a fleeting moment of shallow vanity, and now he was about to pay the ultimate price. The reality of standing in that dusty warehouse staring at the legal deed to their own home finally broke my parents completely. David and Patricia did not apologize or beg for forgiveness. Instead, they spun around and sprinted out the heavy metal doors, leaving Silas, the antique dealer, stammering in the background. Marcus Sterling watched them flee and calmly adjusted his expensive jacket. He turned to me and said, "They are desperate, Chloe, and desperate people make incredibly foolish mistakes. We need to get to the hospice center right now." Marcus was absolutely right. My parents knew the pink luxury vehicle was gone, and the felony charges against Hunter were already in motion. The only way they could possibly regain control of their shattered lives was to completely invalidate the blind trust that held the deed to the mansion. And the only way to do that was to prove the creator of the trust was mentally incompetent. They were heading straight for my grandmother. We drove across the city as fast as the speed limit allowed. By the time we walked into the pristine lobby of the Sunrise Hospice Center, we could already hear my mother's shrill voice echoing down the quiet corridor. Marcus and I hurried toward room 412. The door was wide open. Inside the room, my grandmother Eleanor was sitting up in her medical bed looking remarkably serene despite the chaos surrounding her. Patricia and David were standing right over her, aggressively waving a stack of legal documents in her face. Standing nervously near the door was a sketchy-looking man holding a notary stamp. He looked like someone my father had paid under the table to bypass standard legal procedures. "Just sign the paper, Mother," Patricia demanded, her voice shrill and frantic. "You are sick and confused. You do not know what you are doing anymore. You let Chloe manipulate you into giving away our home. You need to sign this power of attorney over to David right now before you ruin the entire family." David leaned closer, pointing a pen at my grandmother's frail hand. "We are doing this for your own good, Eleanor. You are not in your right mind. If you do not sign this, we will have to get a court order to declare you legally incompetent. Do not make this harder than it has to be." I stepped into the doorway ready to intervene and defend her, but Marcus held out a strong hand to stop me. He wanted me to watch. He knew Eleanor did not need our protection. My grandmother looked at the pen, then looked at my sweating, desperate father. She did not look scared or confused. Instead, a low, chilling laugh escaped her lips. It was a sound full of absolute authority. She slowly reached over to her bedside table, but she did not reach for the pen. She pressed a large red call button. "You two have always been so remarkably predictable," Eleanor said, her voice crystal clear and dripping with complete disdain. "You think because I am dying I am somehow weak. You think you can barge in here and bully me into handing over my legacy so you can continue to fund your pathetic, shallow lives." Before Patricia could utter another word of protest, the hospital room door swung open behind us. The chief medical director of the hospice facility walked in, flanked by two large armed security guards. The director was a tall, imposing woman who had been close friends with my grandmother for over 20 years. Eleanor offered a polite nod to the director. "Thank you for arriving so quickly, Helen. Please inform my daughter and her husband about the activities I engaged in yesterday morning." The director crossed her arms and glared at my parents. Yesterday at exactly 9 in the morning, Eleanor underwent a comprehensive 3-hour psychiatric and cognitive evaluation. The examination was conducted by 2 independent board-certified psychiatrists. She passed with perfect scores. She is of entirely sound mind, fully capable of making her own legal decisions and completely aware of her surroundings. Any claim of dementia or mental incompetence is medically and legally baseless. The sketchy notary standing by the door turned completely pale. He realized he was participating in an attempted fraud against a highly protected patient. He shoved his stamp into his pocket and practically ran out of the room without saying a single word. David stared at the medical director in absolute shock. The papers in his hands suddenly became worthless pieces of trash. Patricia stumbled backward, gripping the edge of the visitor chair. She looked at her mother with wide, terrified eyes. "You planned this," Patricia whispered. "You knew we would come here." "Of course I knew," Eleanor replied smoothly. "I raised you, Patricia. I know exactly how greedy and selfish you are. You tried to steal from Chloe because you thought she was an easy target. You sold the one thing I asked her to keep safe just to buy a car for a girl who has never worked a hard day in her life. You tried to strip away your own daughter's security to fund your vanity." Patricia began to cry, but there were no tears, just dry, heaving sobs of a narcissist who had finally been backed into a corner. "Mother, please," she begged. "We have nowhere to go. Hunter is in jail. The police are investigating the sale. You cannot just leave us with absolutely nothing at all." Eleanor leaned forward, her sharp eyes piercing through my mother's fake tears. "I am not leaving you with nothing. I am leaving you with exactly what you earned." The room was incredibly quiet. My grandmother pointed a frail finger directly at Patricia. "You have exactly 30 days to vacate my property. Chloe is your new landlord and she does not take late rent. Get out of my sight right this very second before I call the police on you." The absolute finality in my grandmother's voice sent Patricia and David stumbling backward out of the hospice room. They practically ran down the pristine corridor, leaving behind the shattered remains of their pathetic scheme. I stood beside Eleanor, feeling a profound sense of closure. The woman who had given me life had just been stripped of all her power, and she knew it. 2 days later, the reality of my grandmother's promise materialized in the middle of their perfect suburban neighborhood. It was a bright Tuesday morning, exactly the time when all the affluent housewives were out walking their purebred dogs or gathering for morning tennis. Marcus Sterling had hired a highly visible and incredibly loud process server for the occasion. The man pulled his unmarked van right into the center of my parents' driveway, blocking the path completely. Patricia was on the front porch when the process server approached. He held a bright yellow legal folder demanding her identity. When she tried to shoo him away, he announced the contents at a volume that carried across the manicured lawns. He formally served Patricia and David with a 30-day notice to vacate the premises, citing a change in legal ownership and a refusal to renew tenant agreements. Neighbors stopped dead in their tracks to watch the spectacle. Patricia snatched the folder, her face burning bright red as whispers began. The facade of their successful lives was torn away in broad daylight. They were no longer the elite homeowners. They were simply unwanted tenants being legally evicted by their daughter. While my parents faced total social ruin in the front yard, my sister Madison was experiencing a complete meltdown on the internet. Without the hot pink Porsche parked in the driveway and the impending loss of the luxurious mansion aesthetic, her entire social media influencer persona was rapidly deteriorating. She could no longer post content pretending she was a self-made millionaire living a life of endless glamour. Desperate for attention and sympathy, Madison decided to go live on Instagram to her hundreds of thousands of followers. I sat in my restoration studio watching her broadcast on my tablet. She was sitting on her bedroom floor wearing oversized sweatpants and crying real tears without makeup. It was a calculated performance designed to manipulate her audience. Madison stared into the camera and painted herself as the ultimate victim. She told her followers that a greedy, jealous family member had manipulated a dying woman to steal her inheritance. She claimed I was trying to leave her homeless just weeks before her wedding. She cried about how unfair life was and begged her followers to send donations to a crowdfunding link she had pinned to her profile. I watched her wipe away a fake tear and felt absolutely nothing but cold indifference. I did not engage in the online drama. I did not leave a comment defending myself or post a rebuttal video to clear my name. Arguing with a narcissist on the internet was a game for fools. Instead, I picked up my phone and called Marcus. I told him about Madison's little broadcast, and we quickly drafted a much more effective response. Madison had publicly benefited from the stolen piano money, specifically the $15,000 commission her fiancé Hunter had pocketed to buy her engagement ring. Since she was openly flaunting that ring on her live stream while soliciting donations, Marcus and I prepared a legally binding invoice. The next morning, a courier delivered a certified letter directly into Madison's hands. It was not a cease and desist. It was a formal demand for the immediate repayment of the $15,000. The letter explicitly stated that because she knowingly received stolen funds derived from felony wire fraud, she was now considered a financial accessory to the crime. If she did not repay the money within 7 days, Marcus would forward her name to the district attorney to be included in Hunter's criminal indictment. Madison immediately ended her crowdfunding campaign and deleted the live stream. The threat of federal prison instantly silenced her victim narrative, but her problems were only just beginning. Hunter had secured a temporary release on bail, but the reality of his situation was crashing down hard. Facing federal prison, his auto broker license was permanently revoked and his reputation destroyed. He only tolerated Madison's attitude for her perceived wealth, securing a lifetime of financial safety nets. Now that the pink Porsche was repossessed, the mansion was lost, and my parents were flat broke. Hunter realized he had tied himself to a sinking ship. He was a survivor and a predator, and predators do not stick around when the prey runs out of meat. While Madison was hyperventilating over the legal invoice I had sent her, Hunter was quietly packing his designer suitcases. He did not bother to say goodbye or leave a note explaining his departure. He simply loaded his belongings into the back of a cheap rental car. But Hunter was not leaving empty-handed. He opened his banking application. He and Madison had a joint wedding fund account, pooling their savings and cash gifts. With a few quick taps, Hunter transferred the entire $68,000 into his offshore account. Madison walked out of her bedroom holding my invoice just in time to see the rental car speeding away. She checked her phone and saw the zero balance notification from the bank. She fell to her knees in the empty hallway, screaming as she finally realized she was completely and utterly alone. Her perfect little world had completely shattered. The luxurious lifestyle she had always flaunted was nothing more than a hollow illusion built on stolen money and fragile lies. Now she had no car, no wedding, and absolutely no financial future. I sat alone in my quiet restoration studio, carefully polishing an old antique violin while smiling softly to myself. My sister was finally learning the devastating true cost of her relentless daily vanity. While Madison was sobbing in her empty hallway, Patricia was desperately trying to cling to the shreds of her fabricated elite reality. She believed perception was reality. If she acted like a wealthy, respected socialite, the world would play along. That afternoon, she put on an expensive designer dress, applied heavy makeup to hide her dark circles, and drove her leased sedan to the Oakmont Country Club. This high society luncheon was the center of her universe. She handed her keys to the valet with a haughty smile, completely ignoring that her husband was facing insurmountable legal debt. She refused to accept that her empire of lies was crumbling. She convinced herself that this was just a temporary setback. Patricia walked through the grand double doors expecting enthusiastic greetings. Instead, she was met with a suffocating, heavy silence. The clinking of fine silverware against porcelain plates abruptly stopped. Dozens of perfectly styled women stared at her. There were only cold glares and quiet whispers behind crystal champagne flutes. The women who usually rushed to compliment her outfits now actively turned their backs, pretending to be deeply engaged in conversation. Patricia swallowed hard, forcing her chin up, and marched toward her usual table near the bay windows. Her closest friends were seated there. As Patricia approached, two women immediately stood up, grabbed their designer purses, and walked away without saying a word. Patricia froze, her forced smile trembling. She took the empty seat next to Beatrice, who had been her tennis partner for 5 years. "What is going on with everyone today?" Patricia asked, attempting a breathy laugh. Beatrice did not laugh. She set down her fork, looking at Patricia with pure, unadulterated disgust. "You really have no shame, do you?" Beatrice said, her voice carrying across the quiet dining room. "Coming here today after what was broadcast on the morning news?" Patricia feigned absolute innocence. "I have no idea what you are talking about, Beatrice." Beatrice pulled her smartphone out of her purse and slid it across the white tablecloth. The screen displayed a major local news article. The bold headline announced the dramatic arrest of a prominent Caucasian luxury auto broker. A large photograph of Hunter in handcuffs was plastered right beneath it. But that was not the part that made Patricia's blood run cold. The article went into excruciating detail about the felony wire fraud charges. It explicitly stated that the police report named David and Patricia as active co-conspirators in the illegal fencing of highly valuable stolen antique trust assets. Patricia felt the blood drain from her face as she stared at her own name in print. "That is a lie," she gasped frantically, pushing the phone away. "That is a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. David and I are victims here. We would never associate with criminals or steal from our own flesh and blood. You have to believe me, Beatrice." Beatrice stood up her chair, scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. You are thieves, Patricia. You stole from your own family to fund a fake lifestyle, and you brought a criminal into our social circle. Do not ever speak to me again. Before Patricia could even attempt to defend herself, a tall, distinguished man walked purposefully toward her table. It was the president of the Oakmont Country Club. He was flanked by two large security guards. He did not offer a greeting. He placed a cardboard box on the table right next to Patricia's untouched water glass. What is this? She demanded, her voice shrill and panicked. The club president looked down at her with absolute freezing contempt. Those are the personal items from your tennis locker, Patricia, he stated firmly, loudly enough for the entire room to witness. The board held an emergency meeting this morning. In light of the ongoing federal grand larceny investigation and your financial crimes, we have voted unanimously to revoke your membership, effective immediately. Patricia gasped, clutching her pearl necklace. You cannot do this. We have been members for 15 years. You have violated the moral clauses of your contract, the president countered smoothly. Your membership is terminated due to conduct unbecoming of this establishment. You are no longer welcome on these premises. Please take your belongings and leave before I have security physically escort you out. A harsh snicker echoed from a nearby table. Patricia looked around at the faces of the women she had spent years trying to impress. They were looking at her like she was trash. Her elite status was gone forever. Humiliation crashed over her like a tidal wave. She grabbed the cardboard box, tears spilling over her eyelashes, and ran out of the dining room as fast as her heels would allow. She practically threw the box into her car and slammed the door. Trapped inside the vehicle, Patricia completely lost her mind. She gripped the steering wheel and let out a scream of pure narcissistic rage. Her perfect life was gone, and she needed someone to blame. She snatched her phone and dialed my number. I was sitting in my studio applying varnish to a violin when my phone buzzed. I let it go straight to voicemail. A minute later, the notification popped up. I tapped play and listened to my mother screaming into the microphone. You ruined everything, Chloe. Patricia shrieked, her voice cracking with vicious hatred. You malicious, ungrateful brat. I was thrown out of my club. Madison lost her fiancé. You destroyed this family over a stupid piano. I will make you pay for this. I will make sure you suffer for the rest of your miserable life. I did not feel angry. I did not feel sad. I just smiled and tapped the screen again. I forwarded the vicious screaming audio file directly to Marcus Sterling with a brief message. Add this to the ongoing harassment file. My mother thought she was intimidating me, but all she had really done was hand my lawyer another loaded weapon. The morning after my mother's hysterical voicemail, Marcus called me with an update that would elevate their nightmare to an entirely new federal level. He had spent the entire weekend meticulously analyzing the forged bill of sale Hunter and my father used for the piano. While tracing the routing numbers associated with the shady antique dealer, Marcus uncovered a massive financial discrepancy. My father had not merely forged my signature on a single document to bypass an ownership check. David had been operating a shadow account for the better part of a decade. During his deep dive into the transaction history, Marcus discovered that my father had been unlawfully utilizing my grandmother Eleanor's social security number. David had secretly routed multiple luxury asset sales and high-yield stock dividends through her identity to completely dodge his own capital gains taxes. He assumed that an elderly woman residing in a hospice facility would never notice the complex financial maneuvers happening under her name. He thought he was an untouchable financial genius, shielding his wealth from the government while maintaining his elite social standing. Instead, he had handed my highly motivated attorney a neatly packaged federal crime with a bow on top. Marcus, being the ruthless legal strategist he was, did not simply file a civil complaint. As a fiduciary representative of Eleanor's estate, he had a strict legal obligation to immediately report the identity theft and tax evasion. He compiled a comprehensive dossier containing every single forged document, every illicit wire transfer, and the specific dates David fraudulently used my grandmother's social security number. Marcus submitted the entire package directly to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. The federal response was brutally swift and entirely unforgiving. Government auditors do not send polite warning letters when they suspect severe tax fraud involving elderly exploitation. They act with absolute authority and devastating speed. Within 48 hours, the federal government placed an immediate and total freeze on every single banking account associated with David and Patricia. Their checking accounts, their joint savings, their emergency credit lines, and even their retirement portfolios were completely locked down pending a massive federal audit. My parents woke up on a Thursday morning to find that their debit cards were instantly declining at the local grocery store. They could not even purchase a basic cup of coffee without the transaction being automatically denied by their terrified banking institution. The sudden realization of their total financial paralysis sent my father into a blind, frantic panic. He had spent his entire adult life projecting the image of a highly successful, invincible patriarch who could buy his way out of any problem. Now he was a desperate man, drowning in debt and facing severe federal prison time. David spent 2 solid days driving his leased vehicle across the city, visiting the offices of his wealthy business partners and country club associates. He barged into their corporate lobbies sweating profusely and begging for a short-term financial bailout. He pleaded for a high-interest personal loan just to retain a criminal defense attorney and keep the lights on in the mansion he no longer even owned. But high society circles are incredibly small and vicious gossip travels faster than light. Everyone already knew about Hunter's very public arrest regarding the stolen antique. They knew my parents were explicitly implicated in the police report. Nobody wanted to touch a man actively under investigation by the federal government. His former friends treated him like a walking infectious disease. Security guards forcefully escorted him out of luxurious buildings where he used to be considered a highly respected VIP guest. David was completely radioactive and utterly isolated from the world he worshipped. With every heavy wooden door slammed directly in his face and his bank accounts frozen solid, David finally realized he had run completely out of options. His immense, arrogant ego totally shattered under the crushing, unbearable weight of impending incarceration. Late Friday afternoon, the silver bell above the door of my art restoration studio chimed loudly. I set down my detail brush, wiped my hands on my apron, and slowly turned around. My father stood in this doorway looking like a broken, pathetic shell of his former self. His incredibly expensive designer suit was wrinkled and stained. His silk tie was missing, and his bloodshot eyes were wild with absolute stark terror. He stumbled into the center of my quiet studio, his breathing heavy and ragged like a hunted animal. Without a single word of his usual towering arrogance, David collapsed right onto his knees on the hard wooden floor. He looked up at me with thick tears streaming down his face, pulling a crumpled piece of notebook paper from his inner jacket pocket. "Chloe, please," he begged, his voice cracking in total desperation as he held out the wrinkled page. "I need you to sign this waiver saying you gave me legal permission to sell the antique piano. The feds are investigating everything and they are going to put me in prison, Chloe. You have to save me." I stared down at the man who had spent my entire life treating me like an inconvenient burden. Seeing him kneeling there sobbing and begging for salvation was surreal. He was not apologizing for the years of emotional neglect or the blatant favoritism. He was only crying because he had finally been caught and the consequences were destroying his life. He pushed the crumpled paper closer to my boots, his hands shaking violently. "Just sign it, Chloe," he pleaded, wiping his wet face with his sleeve. "If you sign it, I can tell the auditors it was all just a big family misunderstanding. I will pay you back every single cent, I swear on my life." I looked at the paper, then looked back down at his pathetic, tear-stained face. The silence in the restoration studio stretched out thick and heavy. I did not feel an ounce of pity right now. My father knelt on the hardwood floor of my restoration studio, his expensive suit soaking up dust. He looked at me with red-rimmed eyes, trying to summon the paternal authority he had wielded like a weapon my entire life. When authority failed him, he pivoted to emotional manipulation. "Chloe, remember the good times," he pleaded, his voice trembling. "I am your father. I protected you when you were little. Remember when you fell off your bike and I carried you home? Remember how I used to read to you? You cannot stand there and let the federal government destroy my life. We are family." I crossed my arms. You want to talk about memories, David? I asked, my voice perfectly steady. I remember when I was 16 with a fever of 103. You left me home alone for 2 days because Madison had a cheerleading competition and you could not miss your golden child shining. I remember you draining my college fund. You never protected me, David. You only protected your own image. David swallowed hard, his face turning blotchy red. We made mistakes, Chloe. Parenting is hard, but this is different. I face actual prison time. The IRS froze every single account. We cannot even buy groceries. You have the power to fix this. Just sign the waiver saying you allowed the sale of the piano. It is one piece of paper. You have the house now. You won. Is that not enough? He reached out, trying to grab the hem of my apron. I took a deliberate step back, treating him like a complete stranger. You still do not understand, I said, shaking my head. This was never a game to me. I did this because you committed a felony to fund a fake lifestyle and thought I was weak enough to take the fall. You sold my grandmother's gift, then stole her social security number to dodge taxes. That is not a parenting mistake. That is a federal crime. The desperation in his eyes morphed into something dark. The pathetic, sobbing father routine vanished, replacing him with the arrogant bully I had always known. He pushed himself off the floor, breathing heavily. You ungrateful little brat. David spat, his fists clenching. After everything we provided for you, we kept a roof over your head. We fed you. I held up my hand, silencing him. You kept a roof over my head until it became inconvenient for you, I reminded him. Do you remember my 18th birthday, David? Do you remember what you and Patricia did when Madison threw a massive tantrum because she wanted a walk-in closet for her designer wardrobe? David froze, his eyes darting away from mine. You packed my belongings into black garbage bags. I continued, my voice rising with absolute clarity. You told me I was legally an adult and it was time to leave so your precious golden child could have more space for her shoes. You locked the front door behind me. I reached into the front pocket of my apron. I had been waiting for this exact moment for 8 long years. I pulled out my wallet, unzipped the main compartment, and retrieved exactly 2 crisp $100 bills. I held them up, letting him see the green paper. When you kicked me out onto the street with nothing but garbage bags, you reached into your expensive leather wallet and handed me $200, I said, staring directly into his horrified eyes. You told me to figure it out. You told me the world was tough and I needed to grow up. I extended my arm and simply let go. The 2 crisp bills fluttered through the air and landed softly on the dusty hardwood floor, right at his expensive leather shoes. Here, I said, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper, figure it out. The ultimate humiliation finally pushed my father right over the edge. His face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He let out a furious, guttural scream and lunged forward, raising his right hand high into the air. He fully intended to strike me across the face to punish me for daring to strip away his power. I did not flinch. I did not step back or raise my arms to block him. I simply stood my ground and pointed a single finger over his left shoulder. David stopped dead, his hand hovering just inches from my cheek. He followed my pointing finger toward the top corner of the restoration studio. Mounted securely against the brick wall was a state-of-the-art 4K security camera. A red light was blinking steadily, confirming it was actively recording video directly to a secure cloud server. Go ahead, David. I challenged him, a cold smile touching my lips. Strike me. Let us see how the federal judge handles a physical assault charge on top of the tax evasion, wire fraud, and grand larceny. I am sure they will love the footage. My father stood paralyzed, his raised hand trembling uncontrollably. He realized he was completely and utterly defeated. With a strangled cry of frustration, he lowered his arm, spun around, and stormed out of the studio, slamming the heavy wooden door so hard the glass rattled in its frame. I walked casually toward the large front window to watch his dramatic exit. My studio was located on a busy downtown street. David stomped down the sidewalk, muttering furiously to himself as he approached his leased luxury BMW. He reached for the door handle but suddenly stopped. A stern city parking enforcement officer in a bright yellow vest was kneeling right next to the front tire of my father's pristine vehicle. The officer was currently locking a heavy, bright yellow steel boot onto the rim of the BMW. "Hey," David screamed, sprinting toward the officer. "What are you doing? Take that off my car right now." The officer stood up, completely unfazed, handing my father printed citations. "The vehicle registration was flagged," the officer stated loudly. "The leasing company reported missed payments, and the associated bank accounts are listed as frozen by federal authorities. This vehicle is officially immobilized pending repossession. Have a nice day, sir." I stood behind the glass watching my father scream at the indifferent parking officer, while the cold reality of his total bankruptcy swallowed him whole. I took a deep, satisfying breath, feeling completely untouchable as his world burned. While my father was standing on the sidewalk screaming at a parking enforcement officer over a yellow steel boot, Madison was desperately trying to save her own skin. Her luxury world had vanished in the blink of an eye. Hunter had emptied their joint wedding fund and fled, leaving her completely alone in a massive house she no longer owned. She was holding a legally binding invoice for $15,000, and the threat of federal prison was breathing right down her neck. Madison was a creature of pure self-preservation. When a sinking ship is finally going under, the rats are always the first to jump into the water. On a rainy Monday morning, Madison walked through the towering glass doors of Marcus Sterling's elite downtown law firm. She did not look like an affluent social media influencer anymore. She wore a plain beige sweater, dark sunglasses, and carried a cheap canvas tote bag instead of her usual designer purse. She demanded an emergency meeting with Marcus, claiming she had highly sensitive information regarding the ongoing federal investigation. Marcus, being a master of legal strategy, instructed his receptionist to escort my sister into his primary conference room. The room was intimidating, designed to make adversaries feel incredibly small. Marcus sat at the head of a massive mahogany table, his hands folded neatly over a pristine legal pad. He did not offer her a beverage or a seat. He simply stared at her, waiting for her to speak. Madison took a deep breath, pulling off her sunglasses. She looked around the room nervously before leaning forward and placing both hands flat on the table. "Listen to me carefully, Marcus," she said, attempting to sound confident and commanding. "I know exactly how my father forged Chloe's signature on that bill of sale. I know the exact timeline of when Hunter moved the cash. I know about the shadow accounts my parents used to dodge their taxes. I have text messages, emails, and dates. I can hand you the entire criminal conspiracy right now on a silver platter." Marcus tilted his head, his expression completely unreadable. "And what exactly are you asking for in return, Madison?" "A deal," she replied quickly, her eyes darting around the room. "I will testify against my parents and Hunter in federal court. I will give the district attorney everything they need to lock them all up for years. In exchange, I want full legal immunity from the grand larceny charges regarding the $15,000 ring. And I want a designated percentage of my grandmother's trust fund. I want my cut of the estate." Marcus slowly reached his hand under the edge of the mahogany table. He pressed a concealed silver button. A tiny green light illuminated on a discreet digital recording device positioned right next to his notepad. He leaned back in his leather chair, crossing his arms. "I need to be absolutely certain your testimony is valuable," Madison Marcus said, his voice smooth and encouraging. "Tell me exactly what your parents did. Tell me everything." Believing she had just secured her financial salvation, Madison completely opened the floodgates. She sat in that conference room and ruthlessly threw her entire family right under the bus. She detailed how David had practiced forging my signature for 2 days before the piano sale. She explained how Patricia had orchestrated the whole thing because she was terrified of losing her country club status. She did not hold back a single detail. She called her mother a greedy, manipulative boomer who dragged her into a criminal mess. She called my father an incompetent, pathetic loser who could not manage his own bank accounts. She blamed them entirely, portraying herself as an innocent victim of their extreme vanity and foolishness. She spoke for 30 straight minutes, handing over enough verified criminal evidence to secure multiple federal convictions. When she finally finished speaking, she leaned back and crossed her legs, waiting for her reward. "So do we have a deal?" she asked, a smug smile returning to her lips. Marcus reached under the table and pressed the silver button again, stopping the recording. He picked up his pen and tapped it lightly against the legal pad. "That was a truly fascinating story, Madison," he said, his tone turning ice cold. "However, there seems to be a slight misunderstanding regarding my professional capacity." Madison's smile faltered. "What do you mean?" "I am a private estate attorney representing the legal interests of Chloe and Eleanor Marcus," explained, standing up from his chair. "I am not a federal prosecutor. I do not have the legal authority to grant you immunity from any criminal charges. Furthermore, as you were explicitly cut out of the will, you have absolutely zero legal right to any percentage of the trust." Madison jumped to her feet, her chair crashing backward onto the floor. "You tricked me," she screamed, her face turning bright red. "You cannot use anything I just said. It is completely off the record. Actually, you walked freely into my office and confessed to being an accessory to felony wire fraud," Marcus replied calmly, walking toward the door. "And since you never asked for a non-disclosure agreement or legal representation before speaking, everything you just said is fully admissible. I will be handing this recorded confession directly over to the district attorney this afternoon. Have a wonderful day, Madison." Madison collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably as Marcus left the room. But Marcus was not finished. He returned to his office and packaged the audio file into an encrypted email destined for the federal prosecutor's office. However, Marcus also made one highly strategic clerical error. He accidentally, on purpose, attached the audio to a text message and sent it straight to Patricia's personal phone. Across the city, Patricia sat in her dark, empty mansion listening to her golden child brutally betray her. The toxic alliance holding their wicked family together was now completely obliterated for good. The day after Marcus effectively dismantled my mother's relationship with her golden child, I received an unexpected and entirely unwelcome visitor. I was working late in my restoration studio, carefully applying a fresh coat of varnish to a 19th century cello. The front door was locked, but a sudden aggressive pounding on the glass made me jump. I looked up and saw Hunter standing on the sidewalk. He was out on bail, and he looked absolutely unhinged. His expensive tailored suit was rumpled, his hair was completely disheveled, and his usual arrogant smirk was replaced by a feral, desperate sneer. I walked to the door and unlocked it, keeping the heavy brass handle firmly in my grip. I asked him what he wanted, knowing he was violating the strict conditions of his release just by standing there. Hunter pushed his way inside, forcing me to step back. He did not waste time with pleasantries. He cornered me against my workbench, his face red with manic anger. "You think you are so smart, Chloe?" he spat, pointing a finger directly at my face. "You think you can just ruin my life and walk away? My broker license is suspended. My accounts are being monitored. You and your bulldog lawyer are draining me dry with that civil suit over a stupid piano commission." I kept my expression entirely neutral. "You stole from my trust, Hunter. The civil suit is merely the legal consequence of your own greed." He laughed, a harsh grating sound that echoed off the brick walls of my studio. "I do not care about consequences anymore. I have nothing left to lose, and that makes me incredibly dangerous. If you do not drop that civil suit by Friday, I am going to destroy this pathetic little shop. I know people, Chloe. I know guys who will come in here with baseball bats and smash every single priceless antique you have. I will flood the internet with fake reviews claiming you ruin historical artifacts. I will make sure no one in the city ever hires you again." I let my eyes widen slightly, allowing my shoulders to drop. I forced my voice to tremble, playing the exact role of the terrified, helpless victim he desperately needed me to be. "You cannot do that, Hunter. This studio is my entire life. Please do not hurt my business." His arrogant smirk immediately returned. He thrived on fear and control. "Then drop the lawsuit," he demanded, stepping closer. "Drop the suit and give me a cash settlement of $50,000 to help me start over in a new city. If you do that, I will disappear and never bother you again. If you refuse, your shop burns to the ground." I looked down at the floor, acting completely defeated. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay, you win, Hunter. I will get you the cash and drop the suit, but we have to do this officially. I need a signed agreement stating you will never come near my business again." Hunter chuckled, running a hand through his greasy hair. Fine. Have your lawyer draft whatever useless paper you want. Meet me tomorrow at noon at the espresso bar on Fifth Avenue. Bring the cash in a bag. Do not try anything stupid or my guys will visit your shop tomorrow night. He turned and walked out of the studio, leaving the door wide open. I waited exactly 10 seconds before picking up my phone and calling Marcus. I told him every single word Hunter had just said. Marcus did not even pause to think. He simply told me to prepare the fake cash and let him handle the local authorities. The next day, at exactly noon, I walked into the quiet espresso bar on Fifth Avenue. It was a discreet location with low lighting and soft jazz playing in the background. Hunter was already sitting in a corner booth wearing a dark hoodie and looking incredibly pleased with himself. I sat down across from him and placed a heavy duffel bag on the table. Hunter reached for the bag, but I pulled it back. Not until you sign the non-disclosure agreement, I stated firmly, pulling a crisp legal document from my purse. Hunter scoffed and snatched the paper from my hands. You really think a piece of paper is going to protect you? He mocked, scanning the document quickly. He saw the $50,000 settlement amount and the clause stating he would cease all negative actions against my business. What he failed to realize in his sheer arrogant stupidity was the specific wording Marcus had used. The document explicitly stated that Hunter was receiving the funds in direct exchange for withholding physical violence and targeted defamation. It was not a settlement agreement. It was a highly detailed written confession of criminal extortion. Hunter pulled a pen from his pocket and scribbled his signature across the bottom line. He shoved the paper back toward me and grabbed the duffel bag. A pleasure doing business with you, Chloe, he sneered, unzipping the bag to check the stacks of cash. You really should read things more carefully, Hunter, I said, sliding the signed confession into my purse. Before Hunter could even ask what I meant, a man wearing a green apron approached our table. He had been wiping down the counter nearby for the last 20 minutes. The barista did not carry a coffee pot or a damp rag. He reached into the front pocket of his apron and pulled out a gold police badge. Hunter froze his hands, still buried in the duffel bag full of marked bills. The undercover detective slammed his hand down on the table, rattling the coffee cups. Hunter, you are under arrest for criminal extortion, blackmail, and violating your bail, the detective announced loudly. 2 officers stepped out, grabbing Hunter. You set a trap, he yelled. I walked past him. I just let you build your own cage. Enjoy prison. The mandatory 30-day eviction window expired on a bitter cold rainy morning. Outside the sprawling suburban mansion, a large commercial truck idling near the curb sent plumes of white exhaust into the gray air. I stood on the sidewalk wearing a thick rain jacket, watching 2 locksmiths drill out the deadbolts on the front door. Marcus Sterling stood beside me holding a clipboard with the official court order signed by the sheriff. Inside the house, my parents were frantically running between rooms. Patricia was weeping loudly, her face blotchy and unwashed, as she threw expensive items into cardboard boxes. David was pacing the foyer, his eyes hollow and bloodshot. They had assumed until the very last second that I would break. They believed the guilt of leaving my own parents homeless would force me to cancel the eviction. They had severely underestimated how completely I was done taking their abuse. When the new locks clicked into place, Marcus pushed the front door open. 2 uniformed movers stepped inside, carrying heavy-duty tape and moving dollies. It is 9 o'clock, Patricia Marcus announced, his voice echoing through the grand entryway. The 30-day grace period granted by the property owner has officially concluded. You need to hand over all garage clickers and step away from the fixtures. Patricia spun around, clutching a heavy lead crystal vase to her chest. Her hair was matted and her expensive designer blouse was mismatched with worn sweatpants. You cannot do this to us, she shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. I raised you in this house, Chloe. I picked out these chandeliers. I chose the marble in this kitchen. You are a monster. I stepped into the foyer, looking at her with total detachment. Grandma Eleanor bought this house, Mother, I corrected her. You lived here rent-free for 25 years while pretending to the world that you were wealthy socialites. You did not build anything. You just consumed. David stumbled out of the study holding a framed oil painting by a renowned local artist. "This painting is worth $8,000. David declared defensively, his hands trembling as he tried to slide it into a box. "We bought this with our own money." Marcus immediately stepped between David and the box, accompanied by a certified estate appraiser he had brought along. The appraiser reviewed a thick binder of receipts and financial audits. "Actually, David," the appraiser interrupted coldly, "this painting was purchased in 2018 using a check drawn directly from Eleanor's medical trust account. It is classified as an estate asset. Please put it back on the wall." Patricia dropped to her knees, right on the hardwood floor, sobbing dramatically. "This is inhumane," she wailed. "You are stripping us naked. What are we supposed to leave with?" Marcus tapped his pen against his clipboard. "You may leave with your personal clothing, basic toiletries, and any items verified as purchased with your own documented personal income. Anything bought with funds from Eleanor's estate or the shadow account stays right here." I watched as the movers systematically removed decorative statues, silver serving platters, and designer handbags from Patricia's hands. The appraiser went through every single room, marking items that belonged to the trust. The delusion my parents had lived in for decades was stripped away piece by piece in broad daylight. The wealth they had flaunted at country clubs and holiday dinners was never theirs. It was all built on stolen money and my grandmother's patience. An hour later, Patricia and David were forced toward the front door. They were holding 6 black trash bags stuffed with their clothes and basic personal items. Patricia looked completely broken, her eyes darting around the empty grand foyer one last time. "Where are we supposed to go, Chloe?" she asked, her voice dropping to a desperate, pathetic whisper. "David has no money. Our credit cards do not work. The bank accounts are frozen. We have nowhere to stay." I looked at my mother and remembered the cold, rainy afternoon when I was 18 years old. I remembered standing on the porch holding black trash bags full of my clothes after they kicked me out for Madison's closet. I remembered how she smirked as she shut the door in my face. "You have your health, and you have each other," I said, my tone flat and unyielding. "Figure it out." The locksmith finished installing the final keypad on the front door. Marcus motioned for the movers to step outside and then gently guided my parents onto the porch. The heavy oak door shut with a solid, definitive click behind them. I stood on the porch as Patricia and David dragged their black trash bags down the wet driveway. The rain was pouring heavily now, soaking through their clothes. They reached the curb and stood under a small wooden bus stop shelter at the end of the street. They could no longer afford an Uber, and they certainly had no luxury cars left in the driveway. Patricia sat on the cold wooden bench inside the bus shelter, shivering. She pulled her wet phone out of her pocket. The screen lit up with a breaking news alert from a popular pop culture podcast app. Patricia tapped the screen with a trembling finger and turned on the speakerphone. The loud voice of a famous podcast host echoed inside the tiny glass shelter carrying across the quiet street to where I stood. "Today, we have a shocking, exclusive interview," the podcast host announced enthusiastically. "We are joined by former influencer Madison, who is speaking out for the very first time about her family collapse." Madison's voice came through the speaker, crystal clear, polished, and entirely rehearsed. "I was a victim of a toxic, fraudulent environment," my sister cried into the microphone. "My parents manipulated me my entire life. They used stolen money to buy my car and lied to me about their wealth. I am officially cutting all ties with David and Patricia. I am a survivor of a fraudulent home, and I am starting my healing journey today." Patricia let out a strangled, hollow cry of utter betrayal. She stared at the phone in horror as her precious golden child publicly threw her into the trash to salvage her own online reputation. The bus pulled up to the curb, splashing muddy water over their garbage bags. The folding doors opened and my parents slowly climbed inside, completely destroyed. I watched the dirty city bus pull away, carrying the 2 people who had made my life a nightmare. The heavy weight I carried since childhood was gone. I walked toward the front doors of my new home. My cell phone vibrated in my pocket. Marcus Sterling's name flashed on the screen. His voice was unusually soft, lacking its typical sharp legal edge. Chloe, he said quietly, you need to get to the Sunrise Hospice Center right now. The medical director just called me. Eleanor's vitals are dropping rapidly. It is time. My heart suddenly slammed hard against my ribs. I did not bother going inside the house. I immediately ran straight to my car, threw myself into the driver's seat, and quickly started the engine. The long drive across the city was a complete blur of flashing traffic lights and rain-slicked roads. I gripped the leather steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My grandmother was the only person in my entire bloodline who had ever looked at me with genuine love. She was the one who taught me to restore antiques, who funded my early business ventures quietly, and who handed me the sword I used to slay the dragons in my family. The thought of losing her created a hollow ache in my chest, but I refused to cry. She taught me to be strong, and I was not going to fall apart now. When I finally rushed through the sliding glass doors of the hospice center, the usual calm atmosphere felt heavy. The chief medical director, Helen, was waiting patiently for me near the front desk. She offered a sad, sympathetic smile and gently touched my arm. "She is holding on for you, Chloe," Helen whispered. "Go to her." I hurried down the pristine white corridor until I reached room 412. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and stepped inside the quiet room. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was slow and shallow. Eleanor was lying in her bed, looking incredibly small and frail. The terminal illness had finally consumed her physical body, but as I walked closer and she slowly opened her eyes, I saw that the fierce, blazing spark of her intellect was still burning brightly. I pulled a chair right up to the edge of the bed and gently took her thin, fragile hand in mine. Her skin felt like cool parchment paper. "I am here, Grandma," I whispered, leaning closer so she could hear me. "I am right here." A faint, beautiful smile touched her pale lips. She squeezed my fingers with the last remaining ounces of her strength. "You did it, my brave girl." Eleanor rasped, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Marcus told me everything. You threw them out. You took back your power." I nodded, fighting the tears that threatened to spill over my eyelashes. "I did exactly what you taught me to do. They are gone." Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her breath. When she looked at me again, her gaze was piercing and full of absolute clarity. "I need you to understand something, Chloe," she said softly. "I did not leave you that custom Steinway piano just for the beautiful music, my dear. I left it sitting in their living room to see if they would finally show their true colors. I wanted to see if their greed would push them to steal from their own flesh and blood. I set a trap to test their morality. They failed spectacularly. But you, my brilliant girl, you passed." A tear finally escaped, tracking a warm path down my cheek. "You risked so much for me," I said, squeezing her hand. "You gave me the keys to a kingdom they tried to lock me out of." "You earned every single piece of it," Eleanor replied, her breathing becoming noticeably shallower. "You were always the only one worthy of carrying this legacy forward. Do not ever let anyone make you feel small again, Chloe. You are a giant among insects. You build things. They only know how to break things. Promise me you will keep building." "I promise," I whispered, pressing her hand gently against my cheek. "I will build an empire, and I will name it after you." Eleanor's smile widened, radiating a profound sense of peace. "That is all I ever wanted to hear," she murmured. Her eyes slowly drifted shut, and the tension in her facial muscles completely relaxed. The rhythmic sound of the medical monitor began to slow down, stretching the silence between each beat. I sat beside her, holding her hand tightly, as her breathing grew faint. I did not call for the nurses or press the emergency button. We both knew this was the natural end of her remarkable journey. A few moments later, the monitor let out a single continuous tone. Eleanor slipped away peacefully, leaving behind a world she had meticulously rearranged to ensure my ultimate safety. I sat in the quiet room for a long time, simply breathing and honoring the immense presence of the woman who had saved my life. When I finally stepped out of room 412, the hallway was empty except for one person. Marcus Sterling was standing near the nurse's station, holding his signature leather briefcase. He walked toward me, his expression solemn but incredibly focused. "She is gone," I told him, my voice steady, despite the heavy grief weighing down my heart. Marcus offered a respectful nod. She was a brilliant, formidable woman, Chloe. The world is significantly less interesting without her in it. He adjusted his grip on his briefcase and looked me directly in the eyes. I know this is a difficult moment, but we must proceed exactly as she instructed. Your grandmother left incredibly strict instructions regarding her funeral arrangements, and she left one final sealed letter for the official reading of the will. We have one last performance to execute. The memorial service for my grandmother was a grand high society event. Eleanor spent her life building an empire, and the guest list reflected her immense influence. Mayors, corporate titans, and philanthropists filled the sprawling cathedral. Outside news vans lined the wrought iron gates. I stood near the altar wearing a tailored black dress greeting guests. Marcus Sterling stood behind me, ensuring everything ran with military precision. We knew my parents would never miss an opportunity to play the victim. Right on cue, a black town car pulled up to the curb. Patricia, David, and Madison stepped out into the gray afternoon light. Their performance was incredibly rehearsed. They were dressed in dramatic mourning attire. Patricia wore a sweeping black veil. David sported an outdated dark suit. Madison had specifically done her makeup to look tear-stained, pausing to ensure local press photographers captured her manufactured grief. They marched toward the heavy cathedral doors, expecting to take their places in the front row. They did not get very far. As Patricia reached for the brass handle, 3 massive security guards in dark suits smoothly stepped directly into her path. Marcus materialized from the shadows of the stone archway, blocking the entrance completely. Patricia gasped, pressing a gloved hand to her chest in feigned shock. "Get out of our way, Marcus," Patricia hissed, keeping her voice low to avoid alerting the press. "We are the immediate family. We belong in the front row. The cameras are waiting for us." Marcus did not move a single inch. He looked down at my parents with an expression of pure, freezing contempt. "You are not the immediate family, Patricia," he stated, his voice carrying absolute lethal authority. "You are evicted tenants currently under federal investigation for tax evasion and grand larceny. You have no legal standing here." David puffed out his chest, attempting to summon his old arrogant bravado. "You cannot keep us out of a public memorial service. We have every right to mourn Eleanor's passing." "Actually, this cathedral has been privately rented by the estate," Marcus corrected him, tapping a folded legal document against his palm. "Chloe holds the exclusive guest list. You 3 are officially classified as uninvited trespassers. If I give the signal, these gentlemen will physically drag you down these steps and hand you directly over to the police officers waiting by the street. I am sure the media would absolutely love to photograph you being shoved into the back of a squad car." Madison's bottom lip began to tremble as she looked at the flashing cameras near the gate. She could not afford another public humiliation, especially with her Caucasian luxury car broker fiancé currently sitting in a federal holding cell. "Mom, we cannot get arrested," she whispered frantically, pulling on Patricia's dark sleeve. "It will ruin my comeback tour." Patricia gritted her teeth, realizing she was completely outmatched. She glared at Marcus with pure venom. "Fine," she snapped. "Where do you expect us to sit?" Marcus pointed a long finger toward the very back of the cavernous cathedral. "There is a designated pew in the absolute back corner near the drafty side exit. You will sit there in complete silence. You will not speak to the press. You will not approach the casket. If you cause even a minor disruption, you will be immediately removed in handcuffs. Enjoy the service." Humiliated and utterly defeated, the 3 of them scurried through the side door and slumped into the dark wooden pew at the very back of the room. They spent the entire beautiful hour-long tribute staring at the floor, completely invisible to the powerful people gathered at the front. When the service concluded, the guests transitioned to the grand reception hall located in the adjacent estate building. The room buzzed with polite conversation and the clinking of fine crystal. Patricia saw this as her ultimate chance to salvage her shattered social standing. She grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and marched confidently toward a group of wealthy country club socialites she had known for decades. As Patricia approached with a forced, tragic smile, the entire circle of women abruptly stopped talking. They did not just ignore her. They actively turned their backs, completely shutting her out of the circle. Patricia stood there holding her champagne looking like an absolute fool. David tried the exact same tactic near the bar, approaching a group of real estate developers he used to golf with. The men took one look at my disgraced father, picked up their expensive drinks, and walked to the other side of the room without uttering a single syllable. The social isolation was absolute and devastating. Word of the federal investigation, the stolen piano, and the eviction had spread through the elite community like wildfire. My parents were completely toxic. No one would even make eye contact with them. They were total pariahs, standing awkwardly in the corner of a room filled with people who used to respect them. Madison stood beside them, staring at her phone, pretending she was not deeply embarrassed by her own existence. I watched them suffer from across the room, feeling an incredible sense of vindication. Their wealth was gone, their status was vaporized, the shiny facade they had sacrificed my childhood to build was completely destroyed. The polite chatter in the reception hall suddenly died down as the lead officiant stepped up to the wooden podium, tapping the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," the officiant announced, his voice echoing across the silent room. Per the strict and specific final wishes of Eleanor, the formal reading of the last will and testament will not be delayed. It will take place immediately. Marcus stepped up beside the podium, holding a thick, sealed envelope. "The immediate family is required to gather in the private estate library right now." Marcus declared, his sharp gaze cutting through the crowd and locking directly onto Patricia. "We have one final piece of business to conclude." The heavy oak doors of the private estate library closed firmly behind us. The room was a masterpiece featuring floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookshelves and a massive stone fireplace. Rain beat against the tall glass windows, casting a gray light over the gathering. I took a seat in a chair near the hearth. Marcus Sterling stood at the head of a polished conference table, placing his briefcase down. Patricia, David, and Madison shuffled into the room. They had spent the last hour being ignored by society, and their social ruin was visible on their faces. As they took seats on the opposite side of the table, a spark of greedy anticipation ignited in Patricia's eyes. She adjusted her veil and leaned toward my father. "Do not worry, David," she whispered loudly enough for the room to hear. "A mother could never truly cut off her own daughter. She was just angry. We are blood. She has to leave us a significant portion of the estate. The law basically requires it." Madison perked up, pulling her chair closer to the table. "If we get a percentage, I can hire a crisis management team," she muttered. "I can fix my brand and buy a car. We just need a few million to start over." I sat quietly, folding my hands in my lap. I did not bother correcting their delusions. I simply watched them build their imaginary castles, knowing Marcus was about to burn them straight to the ground. Marcus withdrew a cream-colored envelope. He broke the wax seal with a silver letter opener. He adjusted his glasses and looked around the room, his expression devoid of emotion. "We are gathered here today to execute the final will and testament of Eleanor Marcus," began his voice echoing in the library. "As designated executor, I am legally bound to read her specific distributions exactly as she dictated them prior to her passing." Patricia sat up perfectly straight, her eyes glued to the stack of papers. David leaned forward, gripping the edge of the mahogany table. Marcus cleared his throat and began reading. He systematically listed my grandmother's vast empire. He detailed liquid assets totaling over $40 million. He read off the deeds to international properties, including a villa in Tuscany and a commercial high-rise in downtown Manhattan. He listed diverse stock portfolios and high-yield mutual funds. With every massive number Marcus read aloud, my parents' eyes grew wider. Patricia was practically vibrating with excitement. She was doing the mental math, convinced that even a tiny fraction of this enormous wealth would instantly restore her elite status and solve her impending federal crisis. After 10 minutes of listing staggering financial assets, Marcus paused. He flipped to the final page of the document and set the paper flat. "We now move to the specific individual distributions," Marcus announced, looking up from the page. Patricia grabbed David's hand, holding her breath. "To my daughter Patricia and my granddaughter Madison, for the unconscionable theft of the custom Steinway piano and the years of relentless emotional cruelty inflicted upon Chloe, I leave you each exactly $1." The library went completely dead silent. The only sound was the crackling fire. Patricia blinked rapidly, her face freezing in total confusion. "Excuse me," she stammered. "I think I misheard you, Marcus. Did you say $1 million?" "I said exactly $1," Marcus corrected her, his tone razor sharp. "The document explicitly dictates that you receive a single $1 bill. This specific provision was drafted to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that you were not forgotten or accidentally omitted from this legal document. By leaving you a designated monetary sum, you are officially acknowledged as an heir. Therefore, you are completely and legally barred from contesting this will in any court of law." Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out two crisp $1 bills. He slid them across the polished mahogany table. One stopped in front of Patricia. The other stopped in front of Madison. "And to my son-in-law, David Marcus," continued reading, "because you are currently under federal investigation for tax evasion and identity theft, using my social security number, you receive absolutely nothing from this estate. Furthermore, the estate will be pursuing you for the maximum legal damages regarding the stolen funds." David collapsed backward into his leather chair, his mouth hanging open in sheer terror. Madison stared down at the single George Washington bill resting on the table, completely paralyzed by the realization that her luxurious life was permanently over. Patricia, however, completely snapped. The remaining shreds of her sanity vanished entirely. The delusion she had clung to all afternoon shattered into dust. "You lying thief!" Patricia screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice cracking with pure violent hysteria. She leaped out of her chair, knocking it backward onto the floor. "You manipulated her, Marcus. You and Chloe brainwashed my mother into giving you everything. I will not accept $1. I want my money." Patricia lunged across the wide mahogany table, reaching her clawed hands directly toward Marcus' throat. Before she could even make physical contact, the heavy library doors burst wide open. The three massive security guards from the cathedral entrance rushed into the room. Two of the highly trained men grabbed Patricia by her arms, effortlessly restraining her as she thrashed and kicked like a wild animal. She screamed loud obscenities, cursing my name, cursing my grandmother, and cursing the entire world for denying her the wealth she believed she was owed. I did not flinch, panic, or react to her violent outburst. I simply leaned over to the small antique side table right next to my chair. I picked up a clear crystal glass of cold ice water and took a very slow, refreshing sip. I sat there in absolute silence, perfectly still, watching the large security team physically drag my completely hysterical mother backward toward the heavy oak doors. The muscular security guards forced Patricia back into her leather chair. She sat there breathing heavily, her chest heaving with sheer rage as her perfectly styled hair clung to her damp forehead. David remained frozen in his seat, staring blankly at the polished mahogany table. Madison was softly crying, her eyes fixed on the single dollar bill resting near her hands. I set my crystal glass of ice water down on the antique side table, making a soft clinking sound that echoed in the quiet library. Marcus Sterling adjusted his suit jacket, completely unfazed by my mother's violent outburst. He picked up a sleek silver remote control from the center of the table. "We are not quite finished," Marcus announced, his voice cutting through the heavy silence. "Eleanor anticipated that her specific financial distributions might cause a certain degree of emotional distress. Therefore, she recorded a final message to ensure her exact reasoning was permanently understood by everyone in this room." Marcus pressed a button on the remote. The heavy velvet curtains covering the library windows automatically slid shut, plunging the room into shadows. A large, high-definition flat-screen monitor descended smoothly from the ceiling panel above the fireplace. The screen flickered to life. There, sitting upright in her hospice bed, was my grandmother Eleanor. She was wearing a beautiful emerald green silk robe, her silver hair perfectly arranged. Even in her final days facing a terminal illness, she looked absolutely formidable. She stared directly into the camera lens with sharp, calculating eyes. "Hello, Patricia," Eleanor began, her voice ringing clearly from the surround sound speakers. "If you are watching this, it means Marcus has already handed you your single dollar bill. I imagine you are currently throwing a spectacular temper tantrum." I recorded this message because I wanted to look you in the eye one last time and tell you the absolute truth about your pathetic existence. You have spent your entire adult life looking down on people who actually work for a living. You strutted around country clubs and charity galas pretending you were a self-made socialite. You looked down on your own daughter because she chose to get her hands dirty restoring art instead of marrying for money. But your entire life was a complete mirage, Patricia. The designer dresses, the luxury vehicles, the massive mansion you lived in, none of it belonged to you. You were essentially living on my charity. I funded your illusion of wealth out of pure pity because I knew without my money you were absolutely nothing. Patricia let out a strangled sob, covering her face with her trembling hands. David tried to look away from the screen, but Eleanor's piercing gaze seemed to track him through the camera. And David, my grandmother, continued, her tone dripping with venomous disgust. You arrogant, foolish parasite. You actually believed you were a financial mastermind. You thought you were so incredibly clever, stealing my social security number to dodge your taxes and fencing stolen antiques to fund your fragile ego. You are not a criminal mastermind, David. You are just a sloppy, desperate thief who left a paper trail so wide a first-year law student could follow it. You traded your freedom and your family for temporary status. Now you will spend your golden years sitting in a federal prison cell. Eleanor shifted her gaze slightly, addressing the screen, as if she could see my sister sitting right there. Madison, you are a hollow shell of a human being. You built an entire identity around taking pictures of things you do not even own. You have no skills, no character, and no future because you never bothered to cultivate a personality beyond your own vanity. You sold out your own parents to save yourself, and you still ended up with absolutely nothing. You are entirely empty, Madison. The complete silence in the library was broken only by Madison's quiet, pathetic whimpering. On the screen, Eleanor's expression suddenly softened. The harsh coldness vanished entirely, replaced by a deep, profound warmth. She looked straight into the camera, and I knew she was looking directly at me. Chloe, my beautiful, brave girl. Eleanor said, her voice turning gentle and incredibly proud. You survived a house full of vipers, and you never let their venom poison your heart. You built a life with your own two hands. You protected my legacy, and you stood your ground when they tried to break you. Everything is yours, Chloe. The estate, the trust, the international properties, and the investment portfolios. Every single asset I spent my lifetime building now belongs exclusively to you. Use this immense wealth to build things, not to boast about them. Use it to support artists, to restore history, and to create a life of absolute freedom. I am so incredibly proud of the woman you have become. I love you, my dear. The screen faded to black and the velvet curtains slowly opened, allowing the gray afternoon light to filter back into the silent library. Marcus Sterling walked slowly around the large mahogany conference table. He stopped directly behind my parents. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out two crisp $1 bills, laying them flat on the table in front of Patricia and Madison. This physical handover made their ultimate disinheritance undeniably official. Marcus then pulled out a thick stapled invoice and dropped it heavily right in front of David. That is your itemized bill for $2.4 million in back taxes and stolen funds. Marcus stated, his voice devoid of all mercy. The estate is officially collecting on this debt starting today. Enjoy your total bankruptcy. David stared blankly at the massive financial demand, his body shaking as the realization of his permanent ruin finally set in. Patricia covered her face, weeping hysterically over her single crumpled dollar bill. They had absolutely nothing left. I stood up, grabbed my heavy black purse, and calmly walked out, completely vindicated. 3 months later, the harsh reality of total financial ruin had thoroughly settled over my parents. Patricia and David were no longer residing in a sprawling suburban mansion with manicured lawns and marble countertops. Their new home was a cramped, moldy one-bedroom apartment located directly next to a noisy multi-lane highway. The constant roar of passing semi-trucks rattled the thin single-pane windows day and night, making sleep nearly impossible. The walls were painted a depressing shade of peeling beige, and the tiny kitchen barely had enough counter space to hold a coffee maker. Patricia spent her days sitting on a sagging thrift store sofa, staring blankly at the stained carpet. She still wore her designer silk robes, but they were becoming frayed and unwashed, mirroring her spectacular fall from grace. Her endless attempts to salvage her shattered social life had ended in absolute humiliation. Every time she dialed the number of an old country club friend or a charity gala acquaintance, the call immediately went to a generic voicemail. Her former socialite friends had entirely blocked her phone number. Nobody in high society wanted to be associated with a family officially indicted for federal tax fraud and the theft of antique trust assets. Patricia was a total outcast, isolated in a dingy apartment with absolutely nothing but her bitter regrets to keep her company. David was faring even worse. The man who had spent decades playing the role of a wealthy, untouchable patriarch was now working the overnight shift as a toll booth operator. It was the only job he could secure with a pending federal indictment hanging heavily over his head. Every night he sat inside a tiny plexiglass booth, breathing in vehicle exhaust and handing out change to tired commuters. His tailored designer suits had been replaced by a cheap, stiff polyester uniform. The physical toll of the grueling night shifts was destroying him, but the legal reality was much darker. Marcus Sterling had successfully delivered the massive mountain of evidence to the Internal Revenue Service and the district attorney. David was formally charged with multiple counts of severe tax evasion, identity theft, and wire fraud. The federal prosecutors offered absolutely no leniency. My father was looking at a mandatory minimum sentence of 7 to 10 years in federal prison. He spent his few off hours sitting at a rickety plastic dining table, buried under a mountain of legal bills he had no possible way to pay. The $2.4 million itemized invoice from my grandmother's estate still loomed over him, ensuring he would never see a single penny of legitimate income for the rest of his miserable life. He had traded his daughter's future for shallow vanity, and now he was paying the ultimate price. While my parents withered away in their depressing highway-adjacent apartment, my sister Madison was experiencing her own spectacular crash into reality. She had spent her entire adult life treating people like disposable garbage while hiding behind a carefully curated social media influencer persona. But the internet is an incredibly unforgiving place. After her viral podcast interview, where she ruthlessly threw our parents under the bus, the public quickly uncovered her direct involvement in the stolen piano funds. The digital backlash was swift and completely merciless. Thousands of angry followers flooded her comment sections, calling her a manipulative fraud. Brands immediately dropped her sponsorships and canceled her contracts. Her follower count plummeted overnight. Madison became completely toxic in the digital space, rendering her totally unemployable in the marketing or influencer industries she had relied on. With her luxury auto broker fiancé Hunter sitting in a federal holding cell and her bank accounts completely drained by his sudden departure, Madison had absolutely no safety net. Desperation eventually forced the former golden child to do the one thing she had always mocked me for doing. She had to get a real demanding job just to survive. Madison was forced to accept a minimum wage position serving coffee at a dingy cafe tucked inside a rundown strip mall. The girl who once refused to wear anything unless it had a designer label was now wearing a dark green polyester apron and a mandatory visor. She spent 8 hours a day standing on her feet scrubbing sticky syrup off counters and cleaning public restrooms. The harsh manual labor ruined her expensive manicures, and the constant smell of roasted coffee beans clung to her hair long after her grueling shifts ended. She hated every single second of it. She despised taking orders from impatient customers who did not know or care about her former elite status. But she had an eviction notice threatening her cheap studio apartment, and she had absolutely no other options left in this entire city. It was a brisk Tuesday morning when the brass bell above the cafe door chimed loudly, signaling another impatient customer. Madison was wiping down a sticky wooden table near the front window, balancing a heavy plastic tray loaded with dirty ceramic coffee mugs and crumpled paper napkins. She let out a heavy, exhausted sigh and turned around preparing to force a fake, bright customer service smile. Her tired eyes scanned the main counter area and she instantly froze. Her ruined manicured hands began to tremble violently. I walked into the busy cafe looking absolutely radiant. I wore a perfectly tailored emerald green trench coat matching the exact vibrant shade of my grandmother's favorite silk robe. My hair was professionally styled, and I carried a sleek, expensive leather briefcase containing the final blueprints for the Eleanor Heritage Foundation. I looked completely unbothered, incredibly wealthy, and entirely free. Madison stared at me in total utter shock. Her mouth fell completely open, and her failing grip on the heavy plastic tray completely gave out. The large tray slipped right from her shaking hands, crashing violently onto the hard tile floor. Ceramic mugs shattered into dozens of sharp pieces, sending dark brown coffee splashing everywhere immediately. 2 weeks later, I stood inside my newly purchased expansive art restoration studio and gallery. The massive space was a complete architectural masterpiece, featuring soaring ceilings, exposed brick walls, and massive skylights that bathed the hardwood floors in natural sunlight. It was a space designed for creation and preservation far removed from the toxic, suffocating environment of my childhood. Right in the absolute center of the main gallery room sat my grandmother's 1920s custom Steinway grand piano. The moving team had delivered it carefully that morning. It was no longer gathering dust in a hostile suburban mansion or hidden away in a cold, damp warehouse. The master artisan had done an absolutely spectacular job. The rich mahogany wood gleamed under the warm gallery track lighting, and the pristine ivory keys were perfectly aligned. The instrument had been fully restored to its original magnificent glory. It was a physical manifestation of my own journey, battered and stolen, but ultimately reclaimed and polished until it shined brighter than ever before. I walked slowly toward the beautiful instrument. I pulled out the matching wooden piano bench and sat down, taking a deep breath. I reached into my leather portfolio and carefully pulled out the fragile, aged parchment paper. It was the original handwritten 19th century composition I had discovered inside the secret velvet compartment. I gently placed the priceless sheet music onto the music stand. I rested my fingers against the smooth keys and played the first chords of the Lost Symphony. The deep acoustics of the Steinway immediately filled the massive studio space. The music was absolutely breathtaking. It was a beautiful, haunting melody that spoke of deep sorrow, profound resilience, and ultimate triumph. The complex notes echoed off the high brick walls, wrapping around me like a warm, protective embrace. For the first time in my entire life, I felt a deep, permanent sense of profound peace. The music washed away the bitter memories of the fraudulent engagement dinner and the cruel remarks from my completely ruined parents. I was finally creating my own beautiful melody entirely on my own terms. As the final resonating chord slowly faded into the quiet room, the heavy glass doors of the studio swung open. Marcus Sterling walked inside carrying his signature leather briefcase. He stopped for a moment, just listening to the lingering acoustics of the magnificent piano. "That was an incredibly beautiful piece of music," Chloe Marcus said, his footsteps echoing lightly as he approached the center of the gallery. He placed his briefcase down on a nearby wooden display table and snapped the metal latches open. He withdrew a thick stack of crisp legal documents bound in a dark blue cover. "We have completely finalized the financial structuring and the federal tax designations," Marcus announced, his tone professional, but carrying a distinct note of genuine pride. "The paperwork is completely ready for your official authorization." I stood up from the piano bench and walked over to the display table. I looked down at the top page of the thick legal packet. The bold letters across the header read, "The Eleanor Heritage Foundation." This was the ultimate realization of my grandmother's specific dying wish. We were officially launching a multi-million-dollar philanthropic grant program. The foundation was explicitly dedicated to supporting young, independent artists and musicians who lacked financial and emotional support from their own biological families. I was taking the immense wealth my parents had desperately tried to steal and using it to rescue talented people from enduring the exact same toxic environment I had barely survived. This program will fully fund university tuition, studio spaces, and essential living expenses for dozens of young creators every single year, Marcus explained, tapping the signature line with his expensive silver pen. Your grandmother wanted you to build an empire of beautiful things, Chloe. You are doing exactly what she envisioned. The board of directors is established and the initial endowment has been fully transferred from the primary trust. All we need is your final signature to legally activate the foundation. I took the silver pen from Marcus and looked down at the documents. I thought about the desperate, terrified 18-year-old girl who was thrown out onto the street with trash bags and exactly $200. I thought about how hard I had fought to learn my craft while sleeping on cheap couches and eating leftover food. I was ensuring no other talented young woman would ever have to beg a toxic narcissistic family for basic survival. I pressed the tip of the pen to the crisp paper and signed my name with absolute unwavering confidence. The Eleanor Heritage Foundation was officially born. Marcus gathered the signed documents and placed them carefully back into his leather briefcase. "It is done, Chloe," he said, offering a rare, warm smile. "The press release will go out tomorrow morning to all major cultural publications. The world is going to know exactly what you built." Marcus turned and walked toward the glass doors, leaving me alone with the restored piano. I walked over to a small cardboard moving box I had brought from my apartment earlier that morning. I reached inside and pulled out a beautiful silver-framed photograph. It was a picture of my grandmother Eleanor, taken many years ago. She was wearing her favorite emerald green silk robe and looking directly at the camera with her sharp, highly intelligent eyes. I carried the silver frame over to the Steinway and placed it gently right on top of the polished mahogany wood. A beam of afternoon sunlight filtered down through the high skylights, catching the edge of the silver frame and illuminating the photograph. As the bright golden light hit the glass covering the picture, my grandmother Eleanor's sharp eyes seemed to twinkle with absolute fierce approval. I knew she was watching over me. The beautiful legacy we created together would forever echo through the grand halls of this magnificent new art studio. Exactly 1 year later, the heavy wrought iron gates of my former childhood home swung wide open, welcoming a completely different kind of guest into the massive front courtyard. The sprawling suburban mansion did not belong to my parents anymore, and it certainly did not look like the sterile monument to vanity they had desperately tried to maintain. I had completely gutted the interior, tearing down the walls of my oppressive past to build something magnificent. The estate was now the official headquarters of the Eleanor Heritage Foundation. Tonight was our highly anticipated inaugural fundraising gala, celebrating the massive grand opening. A valet line of luxury cars stretched down the newly paved driveway, dropping off prominent wealthy philanthropists, renowned local artists, and highly influential city leaders. The grand foyer, where my mother used to scream at me for ruining her perfect aesthetic, was now a breathtaking exhibition hall displaying vibrant artwork created by our first class of grant recipients. Waiters in crisp black suits circulated smoothly through the crowded bright rooms, carrying heavy silver trays of expensive vintage champagne and delicate warm appetizers. Soft classical music floated beautifully through the warm evening air, played live by a professional string quartet positioned carefully on the renovated outdoor terrace. The energy in the building was truly electric and vibrant, entirely devoid of the toxic heavy tension that used to suffocate me every single day. While I walked gracefully through my beautiful new cultural arts center, surrounded by wonderful people who genuinely respected my creative vision, my former family was experiencing a very different kind of evening. Hunter, the arrogant luxury car broker who thought he could outsmart the law, was currently sitting in a cold concrete federal prison cell. He was serving a strict 5-year sentence for extortion and wire fraud, wearing a bright scratchy orange jumpsuit instead of his usual tailored expensive designer suits. Across the city, my father David was sweating inside a tiny poorly ventilated toll booth on the interstate. The harsh, flickering fluorescent lights buzzed constantly right above his head as he spent his grueling overnight shift handing back crumpled dollar bills to angry, impatient drivers. He looked exhausted, his shoulders permanently slumped under the crushing weight of his massive federal restitution debt. In a dingy, mold-infested apartment near the highway, Patricia sat alone at a rickety plastic table. The bitter, angry woman who once relentlessly terrorized wealthy country club waiters was now aggressively clipping cheap discount grocery coupons out of a damp local newspaper. Her expensive designer clothes were long gone, sold off quickly just to pay for basic winter heating and monthly electricity. And then there was Madison. The former golden child who believed she was destined for internet fame was aggressively scrubbing sticky syrup off a dirty table at a strip mall cafe. Her fake acrylic nails were severely chipped and broken, and her once famous social media accounts remained permanently deleted from the internet. They had all traded their souls for a fragile illusion of wealth, and now they were paying the ultimate price in complete isolation. I stood proudly at the very top of the grand sweeping marble staircase, looking down thoughtfully at the packed, lively reception hall. I saw Marcus Sterling holding a crystal glass and chatting warmly with the new gallery curator. I saw young, talented, independent musicians laughing happily together, finally given the absolute financial freedom to pursue their creative passions without begging for basic daily survival. I saw a beautiful community built entirely on solid mutual respect and genuine authentic support. I realized in that profound moment that the greatest revenge I could have ever achieved was not destroying my family. They had ultimately destroyed themselves through their own relentless greed and deep narcissism. My true revenge was removing their power over me entirely. I had successfully and permanently severed the heavy, invisible chains of toxic guilt and forced obligation they constantly used to keep me feeling small and insignificant. I did not need their conditional approval. I did not need to fight for a place at their table because I had built my own massive table and invited only the people who truly deserved a seat. I was no longer the scapegoat. I was the sole architect of my own incredibly vibrant and highly successful destiny. A soft, gentle hush quickly fell over the crowded room as I slowly and gracefully descended the wide marble steps. The talented string quartet beautifully finished their final piece, and the gathered guests turned their full attention directly toward me, raising their sparkling crystal glasses in eager anticipation. I stepped up to the polished wooden podium, grabbing a chilled glass of vintage champagne from a passing silver tray. I looked out warmly at the massive sea of smiling, genuinely supportive faces. I thought deeply about my wonderful grandmother Eleanor and the truly incredible gift she had graciously given me. She had handed me the absolute truth, and I used it to set myself free. "Thank you all so much for being here tonight," I said, my confident voice projecting clearly across the grand, echoing foyer. "We built this powerful foundation to financially support the brave creators, the bold fighters, and resilient survivors. We built this to carefully ensure that no talented voice is ever brutally silenced by those who only know how to tear beautiful things down." I raised my champagne glass high into the air, the heavy crystal catching the bright, dazzling light of the modern sparkling chandeliers. To those who try to break us, I proudly declared, a fierce, genuine smile lighting up my face. "Thank you for handing us the exact tools we needed to completely rebuild ourselves." I took a slow, satisfying sip of the cold champagne as the large crowd erupted into thunderous, enthusiastic applause. The beautiful sound of classical music swelled up around me, filling the massive estate. I stood there bathed in the warm light, completely free, incredibly wealthy, deeply respected, and absolutely untouchable. The ultimate lesson from Chloe's journey is that true vindication does not come from destroying those who hurt you, but from removing their power over your life. Toxic families rooted in greed and vanity will eventually orchestrate their own downfall. By standing firm, refusing to be a victim, and embracing the unwavering support of those who genuinely care, you can transform deep betrayal into beautiful resilience. Chloe built an empire of hope from the ashes of their deceit. Never let anyone diminish your intrinsic worth. Always remember to stay strong. Please like this video and share your story down below.